Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Melania Ray. This is the story of Melania Ray, a striking woman who was a drill instructor in the Ken Regiment at the time of the incident. She was married to Salvatore Paralisi and they had a one-year-old daughter, Vittoria. The family lived in a small village called Oscolaquina, near the San Marco Plateau in Italy. At this time, tourists walking along the paths below the mountainside could not see the flowers that usually bloom on the plateau because the snow had only recently melted. However, a bar and small shops were open, allowing visitors to stroll and enjoy the view. The tragedy occurred on Monday, April 18, 2011, around 3 p.m. On that day, Salvatore arrived in the area with his young daughter after parking his car nearby. He entered a small bar, used the restroom, and then asked the locals if they had seen his wife, Melania. She had recently given birth and had gone missing. At the time, she was 28 years old, athletic, and had long dark hair. When Salvatore learned that no one had seen Melania, he became more anxious, pacing back and forth. He eventually broke down in tears, expressing his fear that his wife had been kidnapped. The people there decided to support him and his daughter by helping to search for Melania. They went out onto the porch and walked along the path from the parking lot to the bar, hoping to find any sign of her, but they found nothing. The Salvatore explained that earlier that morning, he had been with his wife. After lunch, they went to the plateau, where he played with his daughter near the swings in the playground. His wife had planned to step away briefly to buy coffee and use the restroom, but she did not return. Sensing that something was wrong, he began calling her numerous times over the past 15 minutes, but she didn't answer. He realized her phone was missing and suspected that she might have been kidnapped by people in a passing car. The Salvatore remained at the bar and spoke with the owner, Giovanna, but the longer he stayed, the more unusual his behavior seemed. First, Salvatore was inadequately dressed for a cool spring day. Second, he seemed to neglect his one-year-old daughter while he grieved for his missing wife. The little girl wandered through the bar, grew hungry, and felt cold, but her father paid no attention to her needs, continuing to cry and recount his story about his wife's disappearance. At 4:34 p.m., a call came into the local police station from Giovanna, the owner of a bar. She called the emergency services because Salvatore had just left, reporting that he had not been able to find his wife for over an hour and was concerned that she might have been kidnapped. He had his young daughter, just over a year old, with him and the father was clearly upset. When he returned to the bar, Giovanna handed him the phone to speak to the police. The shaky man gave the dispatcher some details about himself and his missing wife, Melania. He mentioned that she had a hernia, which may have worsened as they were near the mountains. He repeated the story he had shared with others, emphasizing that Melania had disappeared after going to the bar. Throughout the call, he spoke very softly, often mumbling and stuttering, and there were long pauses. Police had to ask nearly every question multiple times to get him to respond. When the police arrived, he repeated his story, explaining that Melania had health problems, so they were forced to go to the nearest hospital. They then decided to stop for a walk and coffee. While she was out, Salvatore stayed at the playground with their daughter, who was playing on the swings. When Melania did not return, he became concerned and tried calling her, but she did not answer. This was unusual, as she usually answered her calls. Worried about her silence, Salvatore eventually went to the bar where she was supposed to be and began asking people there if they had seen her. As time passed without any news, Salvatore grew increasingly desperate. The police asked him detailed questions about Melania's appearance and the moments leading up to her departure. Salvatore insisted that she was fine, she had just needed to use the restroom, and there was no sign of abnormal. At the scene, the police verified Salvatore's identity and began their investigation. They first conducted a quick analysis of his phone data, looking into his recent interests and searches to evaluate his credibility. The police learned about Salvatore Paralisi, born on August 28, 1987, in the province of Naples, Italy. At the time Melania went missing, he was with their daughter in Felina. His wife, Melania Ray, was born on May 24, 1982, in another small town in the province of Naples. Since both were military personnel, the Carabinieri promptly contacted their military unit for further information. To assist Salvatore, a friend of his who was also a police officer arrived at the scene. He wanted to help Salvatore take care of Vittoria. Eventually, the police were able to gather all the necessary information and then released Salvatore and his daughter. Melania's relatives were notified of the situation shortly after. They rushed to the scene to learn more about what had happened and assist in the search for Melania. During discussions with police, Salvatore acted unusually. As a military man, he knew it was important to provide accurate information to the police to help find his wife quickly. Instead, he dodged questions and slowed down the investigation. Police had to ask him for Melania's cell phone number 3 or 4 times before he shared the information. The police wanted to track Melania's mobile phone to locate her and track her movements. There were only 3 busy walkways between the bar and the playground. One was more than 100 meters long and was mostly visible from the kiosk cameras. The second was much longer and led to the War Memorial, a destination that often has a lot of people passing by. The third walkway, 150 meters long, was also closely monitored by cameras. Surprisingly, however, nothing was seen. The cameras did not record any footage of Melania, raising doubts about whether she had been in the area that day. Data shows that Melania's cell phone was last active at 2:45 p.m., just before she went missing. The activity was near the location where she had been staying with Salvatore and Vittoria. Unfortunately, this information did not lead to any further details. The only hope for the search lay with the National Mountain Rescue Service. Experts were called in to help, bringing equipment and sniffer dogs. Dogs' sense of smell is so acute that they can follow a scent for up to 20 days after being left behind. The dog quickly oriented itself and followed the asphalt road to the monument. At that point, the trail appeared to end, suggesting that Melania may have gotten into the car and driven away. However, Salvatore later mentioned that they had been in the area just over a week ago. This leaves 2 possibilities: the dog was following Melania's old scent or she had actually been abducted. Afterward, the police took Salvatore to the station for questioning. There, he recounted all the details of the day leading up to Melania's disappearance. According to him, she visited a physiotherapist around 11:30 a.m. They then went to a supermarket and later visited the San Marco clinic, where doctors diagnosed her with an inguinal hernia. After lunch, they returned home to change clothes before going for a walk with their daughter. Salvatore noted that they had been in the area for the past month, making Melania very familiar with the territory. Salvatore mentioned that he and Melania had gone to a bar together during their visit. After gathering all the necessary information, the police sent Salvatore home. The main theory of the police was kidnapping, based on information gathered with the help of sniffer dogs. They believed that Melania had approached the road, was abducted, and her trail suddenly ended. All the evidence suggested that she may have been forced into the car. In May, Salvatore appeared on television to share his story, revealing new details. He mentioned that he and his wife had a small picnic near the War Memorial and were relaxing there on the day she disappeared. Salvatore also described the clothes and accessories Melania was wearing when she went missing. Interestingly, he noted that she did not have her handbag with her personal belongings at that time. She was wearing casual clothes and several gold ornaments. However, it was puzzling how a responsible woman could embark on a long trip with a child without any preparation or a handbag. She didn't even have money or cigarettes, which she usually smoked. Melania also forgot to bring a milk bottle and clothes for her daughter. Another point of confusion was how she could have gone to the bar to buy her husband coffee if she had no money. Salvatore's statements became increasingly contradictory, leading to suspicions that he might be lying. With these concerns in mind, the police decided to question Salvatore again to learn more. Salvatore claimed that they had a strong relationship and that they sometimes disagreed on various issues. But these disagreements never escalated into conflict. In general, they had a great, strong family, which was confirmed by relatives and friends. Therefore, the Salvatore was released. The next day, Melania's relatives arrived in town and stayed at a small apartment near the Salvatore home. Although exhausted from the trip, they made it a priority to visit the police station to ask about the investigation. They provided any information that could help locate Melania as quickly as possible. It was discovered that Melania had 2 phones that Salvatore did not mention. One phone was used to contact her husband and friends. The other phone was used to talk to her mother and close relatives. At 1:34 p.m. on the day Melania went missing, her mother-in-law called the second number. They had a conversation that lasted about 9 minutes, during which Melania shared details about the day. She mentioned that her family was going to San Marco to go for a walk and attend the christening of a friend's child at around 4 p.m. The call ended at 1:43 p.m., and there was no further communication. The police got no new information out of Salvatore. His testimony was largely a rehash of what they already knew. The police were puzzled by his decision to stay with the child. They questioned why Melania didn't bring Vittoria along when she went out for coffee. The trip from their house to the park took less than 20 minutes. Did Melania really need to go to the bathroom during that time? And most importantly, where did the girl go afterward? Melania's relatives moved into the Salvatore home and spoke to him regularly about the situation, but he remained quiet and sad, often avoiding their questions. Salvatore's relatives tried to support him as much as possible, helping him care for Vittoria. On April 19, 2011, the entire city learned of Melania's disappearance. This was shocking, as the suburb was known to be one of the quietest and most peaceful areas in the area. Although the police suspected Salvatore, he had no previous legal problems. Salvatore frequently appeared on various television shows, discussing the tragedy he was facing. To clarify what had happened that morning, police checked Salvatore's cell phone. They found that it had been on from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. but then turned off until 6 p.m. That same day, Salvatore drove to Plateau San Mar, where the armed forces, police, and search teams were working. However, he showed little interest in the search efforts or their progress. Instead, he returned the sweatshirt he had borrowed from Giovanna, a bar owner, on the day Melania went missing and quickly left, claiming that he had to go to work. His behavior aroused suspicion among the police. While examining Salvatore's mobile phone, the Carabinieri found something noteworthy. He had been in constant communication with a girl named Ludovica for the past month, exchanging thousands of messages and making calls almost every day. It became clear that he was having a romantic affair with her. Salvatore had fallen in love with Ludovica Pero in September 2009. And their relationship continued even at home in 2011, after Melania went missing. In the summer of 2009, Melania discovered his infidelity and was furious. At the time, she moved in with her parents and she was pregnant with their daughter. Despite this, Salvatore continued to pursue Ludovica, who was 27 at the time and working in their military unit. Eventually, for the sake of their child, Salvatore and Melania reconciled, and she returned home. However, his love affair continued. He often rented an apartment to see Ludovica. After completing her training, Ludovica was sent to Rome, but their relationship continued. Salvatore spent most of his free time talking to her on the phone. Their conversations showed that Ludovica wanted more than a long-distance relationship, but Melania's presence got in the way. In the months leading up to Melania's disappearance, there had been tension between Ludovica and Salvatore. Ludovica wanted him to be with her, and he kept delaying their time together. Melania was determined to keep their marriage intact, especially after discovering that her husband was still seeing Ludovica. She even threatened to expose his relationship with his mistress, which could have jeopardized Salvatore's job. This threat scared him, causing him to distance himself from Ludovica. Melania believed that her tactics had worked, thinking that their relationship was back to normal and that Salvatore's feelings for Ludovica were just a passing love. Melania was determined not to give in. She wanted to resume their relationship, while Ludovica was urging him to leave his family for her. He found himself caught between two women. The situation escalated to the point where, on April 19th, Salvatore traveled to Rome to meet Ludovica's parents, hoping they could start a life together. The issue was that Melania was completely unaware of this plan. At the same time, he was supposed to be spending the holidays with his family, including Melania and their daughter. Just a day before this meeting, however, his wife went missing. This turn of events seemed very suspicious, as love triangles rarely have happy endings. When Salvatore returned to work after his wife went missing, management suggested a rescue operation. They suggested assembling a team of soldiers and using specialized equipment. However, Salvatore remained remarkably calm and insisted that such an operation was unnecessary. He believed that his wife had left him out of resentment, so no operations needed to be organized. Salvatore then deleted his social media accounts, which he had used to communicate with Ludovica. This led the police to discover a potential motive for the crime. By now, the crucial time to find the missing person alive had passed. The police took the situation seriously and concluded that they had no chance of finding Melania alive. The search dog used in the investigation did not detect new traces or scent of Melania. On April 23rd, police received a call from an unknown man who identified himself as a mushroom picker. He reported seeing the body of a woman 17 kilometers from Felina. Police arrived at the scene shortly after. The body was found to be Melania's. Forensic experts discovered multiple injuries on her body during the autopsy. These injuries were consistent with stab wounds caused by small knives, mainly to the head and neck. There were also injuries to her chest and some self-defense wounds. Although Melania was not raped, significant evidence was collected from the scene, including her cell phone, a bloody lighter, a water bottle, and traces of a small car. The most important piece of evidence was a grocery store receipt from the morning of April 18th. Additionally, insulin syringes were found nearby, suggesting that Melania may have been abusing drugs. However, a toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in Melania's system. The police received information from Salvatore about an interesting coincidence. A few days before Melania went missing, she and her husband had an intimate encounter in the same area behind the kiosk where her body was later discovered. Somehow, this information reached Ludovica, who was furious, having been lied to. He had repeatedly assured Ludovica that he was no longer intimate with his wife. This revelation only added to the complexity surrounding their relationship. However, on the day of their encounter, it was snowing and very cold, making it unlikely that they would engage in intimate relations outdoors. Additionally, it was known that Melania was experiencing pain from an inguinal hernia at that time. Given these factors, the narrative of a passionate encounter at the kiosk doesn't seem reasonable. However, this is just an assumption that needs to be proven. The police conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area for any traces of blood. They discovered various pieces of evidence, including shoe prints. In order to gather more information about the suspect, it was important to determine who was in the area at the time of the victim's death. During that time, soldiers from Salvatore's and Melania's regiments were present. In fact, the soldiers accidentally left behind some evidence, such as a water bottle, a store receipt, and shoe prints. This complicating factor hindered the police investigation because much of this evidence was irrelevant to the case. Additionally, the soldiers reported that they did not see anyone suspicious that day and confirmed that no body was present. The police decided to examine Ludovica more closely. They discovered that she did not leave the barracks on April 18th to 19th, providing her with a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Ludovica also shared crucial information, stating that on April 17th, she had spoken with Salvatore about their relationship. During this conversation, Salvatore mentioned that his wife was cheating on him. It was revealed that Ludovica was not Salvatore's only affair. He had previous relationships with other soldiers and women. Although Ludovica was aware of this, she did not consider it significant. Ultimately, it was uncovered that the Salvatore had been involved with several women simultaneously. Salvatore was aware that the police had obtained this information and feared it could be seen as a motive for the murder of Melania. To gather evidence against Salvatore, police installed a wiretap in his car and also eavesdropped on his telephone conversations. This yielded crucial information. Salvatore often talked to himself in the car about his wife's murder, raising suspicions of his involvement in Melania's death. Police obtained permission to search Salvatore's car with luminol, discovering traces of blood inside. Samples were sent to a lab, and subsequent testing confirmed the blood belonged to Melania. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was developing its theory to understand the motive behind the crime. They believed that Melania was a controlling person who harbored deep resentment towards her husband for his many betrayals, yet she kept him around for the sake of their child. This constant pressure worsened their situation. He sought an escape by starting a relationship with Ludovica, who also exerted pressure on him. In this relationship, he felt like a third wheel, leading him to consider getting rid of his difficult wife. Forensic experts have submitted their full report, confirming the findings of the medical examiner. They determined that Melania died between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on April 18th, from 35 stab wounds. It is likely that the attack occurred while she was urinating, as evidenced by her squatting position and an empty bladder. The attacker probably approached her from behind and struck when she least expected it, leaving little chance for her to defend herself. The nature of the wounds indicated that the assault was particularly brutal, stemming from personal animosity. It was confirmed that Melania never reached the plateau on the day she died, based on geolocation data from her mobile phone. The prosecutor's office believed they stopped near the kiosks in the pine forest, where they allegedly engaged in sexual intercourse. This occurred around 2:30 p.m., and it was at this point that Salvatore unexpectedly attacked and killed Melania. Afterwards, he returned home, changed his clothes, took their young daughter, and went straight to San Marco, where he entered a bar and pretended to be a heartbroken husband whose wife had left him. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found the evidence against him compelling. As a result, Salvatore Paralisi was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay €2 million to Melania's family. Salvatore maintains his innocence and is currently serving his sentence in a reformatory in Milan. Custody of Melania's daughter was given to her family. Now 13, Vittoria has expressed her desire to change her last name to her mother's. She does not visit her father and would rather he not know about her choices. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Bonnie Craig. Bonnie Craig was born in Calgary, Canada, on March 30, 1976. Her biological father played a small role in her upbringing, as Bonnie and her older brother Jason were lovingly raised by their stepfather, Gary Campbell. Gary treated Bonnie and Jason as his own children. When Bonnie was 5 years old, Gary and her mother Karen had a son named Adam. 2 years later, a younger sister named Samantha was born, and she quickly became Bonnie's close companion. Bonnie loved to dress Samantha in fairy tale costumes and teach her everything Bonnie had learned. Gary, the head of the family, worked in the oil industry, which required him to move frequently to different locations. As a result, Bonnie was used to changing schools, having attended 6 elementary schools and 2 high schools, which taught her to adapt to new environments and make friends easily. During her childhood, Bonnie lived in a variety of climates. From sunny California with its outdoor pool to snowy Anchorage, West Texas, and finally back to the beautiful landscapes of Alaska. However, Karen and Gary's sudden divorce marked a significant change for the children. Samantha and Adam began alternating between their parents' homes. Bonnie focused on her studies and various extracurricular activities, including swimming, diving, horseback riding, writing poetry, and playing the violin and viola in the school orchestra. However, life continued to present her with unforeseen challenges. While she was trying to come to terms with her parents' divorce, tragedy struck when her best friend died in a drunk driving accident, a tragedy that profoundly changed Bonnie's outlook on life. She pledged to abstain from drinking and driving, and she was so concerned about the risks of driving that she decided not to get a driver's license for fear of getting into an accident. Instead, she chose to walk or take public transportation. To raise awareness about the dangers of drunk driving. After graduating from high school, Bonnie moved to Anchorage to study psychology at the University of Alaska. At the same time, her boyfriend, Cameron Miyazaki, was studying architecture at the University of California at Berkeley. Despite the physical distance, they kept in touch by phone and exchanged emails regularly. Bonnie's home life became crowded as her mother began a new relationship with Jim Foster, who brought her 3 children with him. In search of more independence, Bonnie decided to move in with her stepfather. The move was strategic, as it put her only a 15-minute drive from college. Keeping her vow, she took public transportation to class 3 times a week, enjoying brisk walks to the bus stop under the clear blue Alaskan sky. She also balanced her studies with a part-time job at Sam's Club. Her life was filled with purpose, ideals, and passion. On the morning of September 28, 1994, Bonnie left her stepfather's house and headed to the bus stop to attend college classes. That day, a student at the University of Anchorage was taking scenic photos on a hiking trail in Chugach State Park, about 15 miles from Bonnie's house. The park was especially beautiful at this time of year, due to Alaska's mild temperatures, long daylight hours, and beautiful scenery. As the student adjusted her camera lens, she noticed something unusual in the water near the cliff's edge, a striking blue object. Upon closer inspection, she discovered a heartbreaking sight, a woman floating face down in shallow water. She immediately called the police to report the incident. The McHugh Creek section is difficult to access except from the cliff top or along the stream for miles, suggesting a tragic accident. Initially, police believed the victim may have slipped and fallen from the cliff top, resulting in her death. This accidental theory was the first conclusion investigators reached. It is believed that the victim, attracted by the peaceful atmosphere of the park, may have lost her balance and fallen tragically. The body was then transferred to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of injuries and assist in identifying the victim. The autopsy revealed that the young woman died from drowning and severe head trauma, likely caused by a fall from the cliff. A unique class ring, often worn by graduating students, helped police identify the victim as Bonnie Craig. To confirm their findings, police contacted Bonnie's family. Karen, Bonnie's mother, is on a short trip to a coastal town to attend a relative's wedding with her husband, Jim, who spent his childhood there. The trip is significant because Karen will meet Jim's parents for the first time. Karen is having a wonderful time with her future in-laws, laughing and sharing stories. But she has no idea that tragedy has struck her beloved daughter, Bonnie. A knock on the cruise ship's door at 3 a.m. shatters the peaceful atmosphere. When faced with the heartbreaking news, Karen initially refuses to believe it, thinking it's a cruel joke. It's unthinkable that her responsible daughter would be alone in the park instead of attending college classes. The news of Bonnie's death from the police has left Karen devastated. Karen has spent the past 3 years working undercover for the Anchorage Police Department. After graduating from the police academy, she specialized in drug trafficking cases. Her colleagues deeply respected her problem-solving skills, which she had developed over years of dedication to her job. However, Karen's dedication extended beyond her work to her family. Her undercover work often required a difficult balance between her two roles. Karen instinctively questioned the initial ruling that Bonnie's death was an accident, and her priority was to turn the investigation over to her own department. Believing that there was more to her daughter's tragic death, she asked the police for detailed information about the circumstances surrounding the incident, including whether Bonnie had shown any signs of sexual violence. However, the police noted that Bonnie had been found fully clothed. Karen knew that a more thorough investigation was needed. Her daughter, Bonnie, was responsible and trustworthy, always kept her promises, and she didn't even have a driver's license, so it was difficult to understand why she was alone and miles away from home during school hours. What further confused Karen was that Bonnie's personal belongings were not at the scene, which made her suspect that the police force might be inclined to rush to classify the incident as an unfortunate accident. Karen was determined to continue her search for the truth. Karen returned to Alaska on the earliest flight possible to formally identify the body, holding out hope that the deceased might not be her daughter, Bonnie. Entering the morgue, she hesitantly approached the ambulance where the body was covered with a white sheet. When she pulled the sheet away and saw the face, her worst fears came true. It was indeed her daughter, Bonnie, resting in eternal peace. Karen's instincts, as a grieving mother and a law enforcement officer, told her that her daughter's death was more than just an accident. As she held her daughter's hand, she saw bruises and swelling on her knuckles, which she assumed were defensive wounds. Karen wanted the police to record this evidence, believing it could be crucial in finding clues before her daughter was buried. The police were skeptical, thinking the injuries could have been caused by a fall. Despite the police's skepticism, Karen decided to take a different approach in her quest for justice. Karen reached out to her media contacts. The shocking news of a young college student's death in a creek quickly garnered widespread attention from the local media. Karen attempted to contact her superiors, hoping for assistance as precious time was running out, but was told the matter was beyond their scope. The next day, Karen, Jim, Gary, Jason, Adam, and Samantha gathered at the funeral home to say their final goodbyes to Bonnie. It was difficult for her siblings to see her lying motionless, knowing how full of life she had once been. As they prepared for the funeral, they had to choose a casket. Karen, wanting to keep any potential evidence safe, decided on a stone crypt, thinking that it might need to be reopened in the future if new information came to light. Although she tried to seek help and attention from the media, her efforts seemed to complicate things rather than help uncover the truth. Karen was summoned to the police station and asked not to publicly call the incident a crime so as not to affect the ongoing investigation. The police were carefully reviewing all possible leads and were considering Gary Campbell, Bonnie's stepfather, as a potential suspect. They suspect him because his alibi doesn't quite add up and there are reports of conflict between him and Bonnie. This information leaves Karen stunned, as she finds it hard to believe that Gary, who has always been Bonnie's loving father, could be involved in such a terrible thing. The situation worsens when Karen goes to Gary's house to collect her daughter's belongings, but finds Bonnie's room locked. An argument breaks out when Gary accuses Karen of stealing a photo of Bonnie that she took without his permission. He insists on keeping the memories of the girl he cherishes. Bonnie's death has a profound effect on her younger sister Samantha, who was only 12 when the tragedy occurred. Samantha begins to struggle in school and finds it difficult to concentrate at home. She often shares everything with Bonnie and feels completely lost without her guidance. The confusion that arose from her sister's death even caused her to doubt her own trust in her father, leaving her uncertain about what was right. One evening, as her father, Gary, was tucking her in for bed, fear filled her eyes as she asked if he was responsible for Bonnie's death. Gary was surprised and hurt by her question. He regained his composure and gently reassured Samantha that he would never hurt her sister. His comforting words helped her to ease her fears and trust him again. After Bonnie's death, the police spoke to Adam and Samantha, both of whom confirmed that their father, Gary, had been home the day Bonnie died, only leaving for work after Bonnie had left the house. His alibi was confirmed by co-workers and supervisors, clearing any doubts about him. An autopsy revealed that Bonnie had died several hours before her body was found. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, and she also suffered severe head injuries that may have been caused by falling from a cliff or being struck by a heavy object. The police began a thorough investigation into Bonnie's death, which was initially ruled an accident at the park. A police officer carefully searched the area near the cliff and found a leaf with a drop of Bonnie's blood a few feet from the edge of the cliff. This prompted an investigation into the presence of blood. If her injuries were caused by a fall, the discovery led the police to consider that Bonnie's fall may not have been an accident, but rather the result of someone else's actions. The police were aware that solving this case would be difficult and would require them to proceed with caution. Therefore, they chose not to notify the relevant parties at this time. Family members suspected that a crime had occurred and the police deliberately withheld all information about the case, to avoid alerting potential perpetrators. They could not escape the feeling that the killer could be someone close to Bonnie. This made Karen's sudden media release a hindrance to the investigation. Bonnie Craig's funeral was filled with loved ones, including friends, family, and acquaintances, as well as her boyfriend, who traveled from California to say goodbye. He was deeply saddened, as he could never have imagined such a tragic ending to their story. Even Bonnie's biological father, Gordon Craig, who had not played an active role in her life, attended the funeral to pay his respects and say goodbye to her. The funeral took place at a church that Bonnie occasionally visited. It was a moment for everyone who knew Bonnie to pay their last respects, share fond memories of her, and support each other during this difficult time. A week after Bonnie's death, Karen decided to investigate her daughter's case herself, since the police had not provided any updates. Karen carefully traced Bonnie's pre-dawn route from Gary's house to try to understand what might have been going through her daughter's mind that morning. She wanted to put herself in Bonnie's shoes and imagine what details might have caught her attention. As Karen walked along the path her daughter had walked many times that week, she began to realize how dangerous it was. The path was surrounded by tall trees that seemed to loom in the shadows, hiding potential dangers. Karen wondered why Bonnie didn't ask her stepfather to drive her to the bus stop, and why she never mentioned the dangerous path she had walked every day. She later learned that Bonnie felt the same way, not wanting to worry anyone and wanting to be independent. Bonnie was prepared and carried pepper spray, believing that she could protect herself if necessary. Karen had also taught Bonnie from a young age never to hitchhike with strangers, believing that her daughter would only hitchhike with someone she knew and trusted. When the walk yielded no clues, Karen drove around the area, looking for any of Bonnie's belongings that might provide clues to the investigation. Unfortunately, she found nothing. In January 1995, Karen contacted the sergeant in charge of Bonnie's case directly to ask if her daughter had been sexually assaulted. The sergeant was forced to tell her the truth. Karen was allowed to see the results of Bonnie's autopsy, on the condition that they remain strictly confidential. The autopsy revealed that Bonnie's body was fully clothed, but she had injuries to her genitals and male DNA was recovered from a swab. This information must be kept confidential because the source of the DNA is still unknown. During the investigation, all the men associated with Bonnie were questioned and their DNA samples were collected. However, no matches were found at that time. Although several witnesses saw Bonnie walking to the bus stop that morning, none of them saw her actually get on the bus. The question of how Bonnie ended up in Chugach Park, more than 10 miles from her home, remains unanswered. Investigators speculate that she may have been attacked while walking alone in the dark. A few months after Bonnie's death, Jim's family invited Jim and Karen on a week-long cruise, hoping that a change of scenery would help them heal. Karen was hesitant at first, as the cruise reminded her of her daughter's tragic death. However, she realized that the trip could be a chance to temporarily escape her grief. For the past year, Karen had been consumed by grief, the investigation, and waiting for news of her daughter. She saw the trip as a chance to temporarily escape her worries. Karen, Jim's brother Ken, and Ken's wife spent the week enjoying the sights and sounds of the ocean. When they returned to the dock, they received word from the Coast Guard that their family had attempted to contact them about an emergency. Karen immediately became concerned that it might be about one of her children. However, this time the bad news was about Jim and Ken's father, who had suddenly died of a heart attack. The news was especially shocking because the family had just celebrated their father's 63rd birthday, when he had seemed healthy and happy. Unfortunately, this was the second time the family had received heartbreaking news after returning from a boat trip. Karen's remaining children had a hard time coping with the loss of their sister Bonnie and the impact of their mother's relentless pursuit of justice. As the investigation into Bonnie's death became the focus, the children often felt neglected and deprived of the care they needed. Karen struggled with the moral dilemma of balancing her love for her children with her commitment to seeking justice for Bonnie's death, despite the possibility that the case would never be solved. Over time, Karen's children grew up and started families of their own, bringing her immense joy as a grandmother. Amidst these life changes, her youngest son Adam underwent a cornea transplant to improve his increasingly poor eyesight, which unfortunately resulted in blindness in one eye. Karen's personal life went through many changes. She married Jim, but unfortunately their marriage ended in divorce after 3 years. The family faced more difficult times, including the loss of Karen's brother and mother, who battled cancer. Throughout the ups and downs, the sadness and grief of losing Bonnie continued to have a lasting impact on Karen's life. The family experienced a great deal of emotional pain, including sleepless nights, anxiety, anger, and deep depression. On January 5, 2007, 12 years after Bonnie's death, Karen set off on a round-the-world trip with a friend. While staying on an island in the Philippines, Karen received an unexpected email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "Bonnie." The sudden message made her heart pound, as the case, which had been unsolved for years, had recently gained new momentum. A new team of investigators, using an advanced database, retested the DNA evidence found on Bonnie. Their efforts led to a breakthrough. They matched the DNA to a man serving a sentence in New Hampshire for a series of armed robberies. Kenneth Dion was born in 1969. He was 25 years old when Bonnie died. He only became a suspect in the case after his DNA was added to the system in late 2006. With a martial arts background and a track record of competition, Kenneth served in the United States Army. However, his time in the U.S. Army was cut short due to his drug use. Kenneth had a particular habit of carrying unusual items in his car, including a 3-pronged stick and nunchucks. Kenneth Dion had only recently been released from prison after a brief period of freedom in May 2007. Kenneth was charged with assault and murder in connection with Bonnie's death. According to the indictment, Kenneth attacked Bonnie as she walked to the bus stop, using weapons and martial arts to sexually assault her. And then, to conceal evidence of his crimes, he dumped her body off a cliff in the park. As more information became available about Kenneth, it was discovered that he had a lengthy criminal record, with 18 convictions, including 10 misdemeanors and 8 felonies. Had Kenneth's DNA been in the database sooner, the case might have been solved more quickly. Kenneth Dion was sentenced to 124 years in prison on October 31, 2011, 17 years after the incident. He received 99 years for murder and 25 years for assault. He is eligible for parole at age 80. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was a motorcycle enthusiast and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers to be the second largest criminal organization in the world after the Hells Angels. Brandon's parents divorced when he was around 10 years old, but they remained on good terms and shared the responsibility of raising their son. Growing up, Brandon developed a passion for motorcycles similar to his father's. At the age of 25, he had his own motorcycle, which he built himself and cherished greatly. Brandon's life took a difficult turn in April 2005 when his father passed away suddenly. In order to cope with his growing depression, Brandon felt the need for a change. He embarked on a new adventure by traveling to Las Vegas on his motorcycle. Living in Vegas for about a year, he met Amber Andrews, a 24-year-old woman who helped him forget all his problems. A whirlwind romance between them led to marriage 2 months after they met. At this time, Amber was pregnant, and in December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child marked an important turning point in Brandon's life. He became a caring, responsible father and husband, prioritizing family over personal interests and pursuing a well-paid job. In contrast, Amber's life remained unchanged. She continued to prioritize her social life, regularly attending biker gatherings and parties, seemingly unaffected by the arrival of the child. As a result, the relationship between Brandon and Amber began to deteriorate rapidly, often leading to heated arguments. The breakdown of their relationship eventually culminated in a divorce 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of their son, largely due to his ability to provide a stable life for himself and his son, a prospect that Amber could not provide. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker, Oklahoma, while Brandon returned to San Diego with their son. Brandon was happy to be reunited with his family, who had helped him raise his son. Gradually, the emotional wounds from the broken marriage began to heal, and Brandon was optimistic about the future again. However, in the summer of 2012, he saw Amber at his doorstep. His ex-wife wanted to reunite, asking him to give their relationship another chance. The emotions that Brandon had tried to suppress resurfaced. He believed in his ex-wife's sincerity and agreed to start over. Their son, Brando, was getting ready to start kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to meet their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they began preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son returned to San Diego, Van Emblom contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Emblom reported that his friend had asked for help removing a body, saying it was that of Brandon Duran. The person who asked Emblom for help was Justin Hammer, 30, of Garvin County. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation contacted the local sheriff's office about a potential crime, which prompted the sheriff and his assistant to go to the farm owned by Justin. The police also contacted Brandon's relatives in San Diego, who reported that they had not heard from Brandon for several days. Police decided not to share details with Brandon's family until they verified the information provided by Emblem. During questioning, Justin unexpectedly confessed to killing Brandon Duran. However, Justin claimed he acted in self-defense, describing Brandon as a fearsome biker gang member who had threatened him. According to Justin, on August 7th, Brandon drove up to his house on his motorcycle, kicked the door open with his foot, went inside, and began threatening him. Justin claimed to have a close relationship with Amber, and this appears to be the motive for Brandon's visit. He told Justin that he needed to stay away from Amber, warning him that if he did not comply, Brandon's friends from a biker club would make him disappear forever. Brandon also threatened to harm Justin's relatives if he did not comply. In response to these threats, Justin allegedly grabbed a nearby handgun and fired. After Brandon died, Justin feared retaliation from the motorcycle club and decided not to contact the police. Instead, he chose to conceal evidence of the incident. Justin moved the body to the bathroom, where he used a saw to dismember it, then placed the remains in 5 paint buckets and covered them with cement. However, the weight of the buckets, made heavier by the cement, made them too heavy for Justin to load into his pickup truck by himself. He asked his friend Emblem for help, who assisted him but then immediately reported Justin to the police and left the scene. Justin then drove to his farm and dumped the buckets in a small pond. After disposing of the body, Justin cleaned the house thoroughly. Then burned all the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags he had used. To dispose of Brandon's motorcycle, Justin gave it to a relative, who unwittingly disassembled it for spare parts, unaware of its origin. Police arrived at Meeker to inform Amber of the tragic news after 5 sunken buckets were recovered from the pond. She was shocked to learn that Brandon had died, although they had been separated, but the couple had planned to reunite and start living together again. Amber explained that she had argued with Brandon the day before, which was triggered by Brandon finding out about her relationship with Justin. After their confrontation, Brandon rode off on his motorcycle, vowing to take matters into his own hands and confront her lover. This account of events initially seemed plausible, but a new twist soon emerged in the case. Criminologists investigating Justin's home discovered new evidence that contradicted his account. Justin initially claimed that Brandon had kicked the door in, but later discovered that the door had actually been kicked in from the inside. Shoe prints on the door matched the soles of Justin's sneakers, indicating that Justin had kicked the door in. Further discoveries included a gun safe containing a list of items needed to dispose of a body, along with a pistol and shotgun. This finding suggested that the crime may have been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act. Additionally, a dog house removed from the pond was found to be filled with cement, containing debris that did not fit into the 5 buckets previously found. Justin was charged with first-degree murder based on the evidence collected. A forensic pathologist analyzed 25 pieces of Brandon's body and determined that he had been shot 4 times in the head. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been shot 3 times with a pistol and once with a shotgun, with the shotgun being the last shot. According to the expert, the gunshot wound occurred after Brandon was already dead and lying on the floor. However, this contradicted Justin's testimony, which stated that he had only fired 1 shot with the shotgun. Police found Justin's testimony suspicious because he did not explain why he would use a shotgun after firing 3 shots with the pistol, especially after Brandon was already dead. This inconsistency raised many questions and suggested that someone else was involved in the crime. The news of Brandon's death shocked his mother, Cindy, when the police called her. After regaining her composure, Cindy explained that Brandon had never been affiliated with the Bandito Motorcycle Club. She attributed Brandon's interest in motorcycles to his father, who shared his passion with his son. However, Cindy's story revealed an interesting detail. Brandon's motorcycle broke down when he left for Oklahoma, so he loaded it into the back of his pickup truck to fix it when he arrived in Oklahoma. Cindy mentioned that her son did not like conflict situations and she believed that his ex-wife, Amber, was the root of all his problems. Amber's infidelity ruined their relationship from the start, and even after having a son, she continued her unfaithful lifestyle. Whenever Brandon expressed disagreement, Amber would become aggressive and start fights. This eventually led to a divorce, resulting in Brandon gaining full custody of their son, which greatly angered Amber. In response, Amber had abandoned her son for more than a year, not caring about Brandon's life. So when she suddenly reappeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and his family were shocked and surprised. To better understand the case, the police turned their attention to Amber, knowing about her relationship with Justin. Amber initially claimed that Brandon had left on his motorcycle after an argument, but Brandon's family disputed that the motorcycle had broken down. The question is, if the motorcycle was not seriously broken, why would Brandon take the motorcycle to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? As for Amber, she never mentioned that Brandon was fixing the motorcycle. She also claimed that she went to see a doctor after Brandon left to deal with Justin. However, the police found no evidence that she had visited any medical facility in the city that day. All of this meant that Amber had no alibi. Police made a major discovery when they discovered that Amber had asked a friend to babysit her son on the day Brandon died. The friend arrived at the house around 3 p.m., at which point Amber and Brandon left together in Brandon's pickup truck, with his motorcycle in the back. Amber had deliberately left her phone at home and did not return home for 8 hours. However, when she returned, neither Brandon nor his motorcycle were in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, police found a text message that had been received just before she and Brandon left the house. The message, sent by Justin, read, "Ink is ready." Police believe this implied that everything was ready to deal with Brandon. Police interviewed Amber's close friends, who revealed that she never wanted to reunite with her ex-husband and constantly spoke ill of him. Amber resented Brandon for gaining custody of their son and saw him as a strict, rigid person. However, a forensic handwriting analysis confirmed that Amber had written a note, found in Justin's safe, detailing the materials needed to dispose of a body. When police accessed the local store's surveillance cameras, they learned that the crime had been planned and prepared in advance. The footage, taken the day before Brandon's death, showed Justin purchasing buckets and other items from a list written by Amber. While awaiting trial, Justin maintained that he acted alone and in self-defense. He was trying to protect Amber, who was still at large. Justin explained that the items Amber listed were for home repairs, not for disposing of a body. He also clarified that he used 2 different types of guns. Justin claimed to have a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other, a claim that police found highly suspicious. A trial that was expected to last several weeks ended quickly as the jury deliberated for about an hour and a half before returning its verdict. The jury recommended a sentence of life in prison without parole. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the outcome, stating that the verdict was appropriate and brought justice to the family of the victim, Brandon Duran. Cindy Ware, Brandon Duran's mother, was pleased with the jury's decision after nearly 2 years of waiting. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her husband Brandon, desecration of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a crime. Amber has pleaded not guilty and hopes to be released on bail. Amber sat in a courtroom, handcuffed and wearing a prison jumpsuit, as she expressed her desire to be home with her son. In an effort to stay with her son until trial, Amber asked the court for bail. However, District Judge Jeff Virgin, who traveled from Norman to preside over the jury trial, agreed to the prosecution's request to deny Amber bail. The trial began in the spring of 2017, more than 2 years after the crime. Amber Andrews pleaded not guilty, her attorney arguing that she was not present at the scene of the crime. However, prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin argued that Amber had the sole motive to kill Brandon Duran. Prosecutor Christy said Amber masterminded the crime by luring Brandon to her lover's house, where he was shot 3 times with a pistol by Justin. Amber then allegedly fired the final shot from a shotgun. Christie stressed to the jury that all of the witness testimony and evidence presented at trial implicated Amber directly in the crime. Christie said, "The only person who wanted him gone was her. The only person with a motive was Amber Andrews. The only person with a reason for him to go away was her. Amber needed Brandon not only dead but gone without a trace. She had a clear motive, and her boyfriend, Justin, had a location where they could commit the crime. They believed they had come up with the perfect plan." According to Christie, the motive was for Amber to get rid of Brandon, allowing her to regain custody of their young son. Amber was away for 8 hours the day Brandon died, and there was no concrete evidence to support her alibi. Prosecutor Christie claimed that Amber helped Justin dispose of the body and clean up the house. She did not want to give her son to a man she hated, and since she could not win custody through the courts, she decided to get rid of Brandon. Defense attorney Jay Mendrose argued that the prosecutor's office had failed to provide any evidence linking Amber to the crime. He emphasized this point to the jury, saying that the lack of evidence had led the prosecution to unfairly attack her character. He asserted that Amber was not a cold-blooded killer and did not plan the murder. According to attorney Jay Mendrose, Justin committed the crime out of fear of losing Amber, which was further complicated by the fact that Brandon traveled to Oklahoma to reunite with Amber, while Justin, who had been dating Amber for a year, was threatened by the possibility of losing her to Brandon. The defense argued that Justin had a clear motive to kill Brandon because he was involved in a complicated love triangle. The attorney claimed that the prosecution had misinterpreted the testimony and actions of those involved. The defense asserted that a person cannot be convicted on the basis of speculation and suspicion. In this case, the only concrete evidence was Justin Hammer's confession, in which he accepted full responsibility and claimed he acted alone. The jury returned a guilty verdict after hearing more than 4 hours of closing arguments in the Garvin County Courthouse. They recommended a life sentence for Amber Andrews, 35. Sentencing was set for June 12, 2017. On the day of the trial, Amber Andrews appeared in a cheerful mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, tearfully took the stand to express her thoughts on how her son's death had affected her and her grandson. Brandon's mother, Cindy, addressed Amber directly, saying that her son's death had destroyed all her dreams. She emphasized that Brandon only wanted to be with his family, and that Amber's actions had taken that away from him. Cindy also mentioned that Brandon would never have the chance to teach her son how to snowboard, something he had looked forward to doing. She stared at Amber, shaking her head up and down, and said, "It was the work of the devil." The judge sentenced Amber Andrews to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her role in the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran. She also received additional prison terms, 7 years for disrespecting Brandon's remains and 10 years for conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber Andrews is currently serving her sentence at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in Oklahoma, while her co-defendant, Justin Hammer, is serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Prison. Brandon's son, Brando, was placed in the care of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services in August 2012 and is living with a foster family. In January 2013, after Brandon's family fought the court system, Brando was allowed to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother. Finally, after 5 years of fighting, Brando's grandmother, Cindy, won full custody of her son. It wasn't until after the trial that Cindy and her family felt it was time to tell Brando the truth about the court's decision and what had happened to his mother, Amber Andrews. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, USA. She grew up with two close sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna. Her biological father left and Elizabeth was very young and never contacted or cared for her. Later, her mother, Juanita, remarried Fidel. He adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own children. Elizabeth has a very good relationship with her stepfather, who always supports and helps her in everything. Elizabeth was a hardworking student and dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future. During high school, Elizabeth met and fell in love with Rudolph Arellano, a boy nearly 8 years younger than her. Although Elizabeth's parents felt a bit uneasy about this age difference, they did not interfere in their daughter's relationship because they saw Rudolph as a serious and trustworthy man. Shortly after graduating from high school at the age of 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph. They had 4 children together, 3 boys and 1 girl. However, Elizabeth did not want to be just a housewife. Remembering her childhood dream, she decided to pursue a career in medicine. After graduating from medical school, Elizabeth worked as a paramedic and planned to continue her studies to become a doctor. She was kind, raised in a Christian family. She regularly took her children to church and taught them to love and care for those around them. Her family and friends commented that she was sensitive and always ready to help others. On the surface, her marriage to Rudolph seemed happy and stable. However, after 13 years of marriage, their relationship began to have serious problems. Previously, Rudolph had been jealous and tried to control his wife in everything. Over time, his behavior became increasingly unacceptable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth decided to leave home with her children and move in with her parents after witnessing her husband's jealousy once again. Although Rudolph tried to reconcile, Elizabeth was tired of his hot temper. She also did not want her children to witness the constant quarrels between their parents. Therefore, she boldly filed for divorce. Just a few days after Elizabeth left with her children and filed for divorce, she suddenly disappeared under mysterious circumstances. According to friends and family, Elizabeth had previously appeared very cheerful. To relieve stress from family problems and the divorce process, she decided to go out with her colleagues to a local club after work. On Friday night, April 15, 2016, Elizabeth, then 28 years old, went out with friends at a club. There, she danced and had fun but did not drink alcohol because she had driven there and planned to drive herself home. After midnight, around the early morning of April 16th, Elizabeth drove home. After parking her car, she called a friend who had gone out with her to let her know that she had arrived safely. However, after hanging up the phone, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared without entering the house. The next morning, Juanita, Elizabeth's mother, was very worried when she discovered that her daughter was not home. Although she knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with her friends, her daughter should have returned home a long time ago. Elizabeth was not in a habit of going out without notice, and her car was still parked outside the house, indicating that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition, and Elizabeth's wallet and cell phone were on the seat. Leaving personal belongings in the car open like that was completely out of her daughter's habit, which made Juanita think that something bad had happened. Without hesitation, she immediately called the police to report her daughter as missing. The police believed that they could quickly solve Elizabeth's missing person case. They still hoped that she was alive because they did not find any blood or signs of a struggle in the car. However, the investigation was more complicated than expected. The first step was to reconstruct Elizabeth's itinerary on the night of her disappearance in detail to identify and interview witnesses. Police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and co-workers who had seen her that night. They confirmed the time Elizabeth left and said she had called back to say she had arrived home safely. Elizabeth's phone contained multiple calls and text messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph, that night, but she did not answer. When police questioned Rudolph, he said Elizabeth had promised to bring the children to his house that weekend. However, she had not contacted him since then, and he thought she had changed her mind. There were still some unclear points about Rudolph's alibi. Rudolph said he had been at a local bar that night with a friend, then went home to sleep around midnight. Several people at the bar confirmed seeing he there, but no one knew for sure where he went after he left. Rudolph claimed to have returned home. But since he lived alone, no one could corroborate this. So the police have not ruled him out as a suspect. Notably, Rudolph did not appear to be upset or worried. Although he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorcing after many years of marriage and having children, it was strange that her disappearance did not seem to affect him. A strange incident occurred the night Elizabeth went missing. A fisherman called the police to report what he had witnessed. He said that around 4:30 a.m., while fishing on a highway bridge, he saw a car stop. The driver pulled out a large object that looked like a person and threw it into the water. The object appeared to have a heavy object tied to it. Due to the distance and the darkness, the fisherman could not clearly see the details or the license plate. The strong wind on the bridge also prevented him from hearing anything. Later, another witness was found. This person was walking his dog under the bridge. He did not see the incident on the bridge, but heard a terrible scream. Then he saw a large object fall from the bridge, heard a splash, and then everything went silent. Based on the testimony of the witnesses, the police decided to check the bottom of the pond near the bridge. After several hours of searching, divers discovered a body tied to a large concrete block with a rope around the neck. The body was identified as Elizabeth Ariano, who had gone missing earlier. The discovery of this body was only possible thanks to the testimony of the passerby and the fisherman. Without their information, the body might not have been found or would have been discovered only after a very long time, because the weight of the concrete block prevented the body from floating to the surface. Initially, a hypothesis was put forward that Elizabeth had voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, details of how the body was discovered suggest it may have been a murder. However, this theory is not credible because it contradicts two important sources of information. First, an eyewitness reported seeing someone throw Elizabeth into the water. Second, her relatives confirmed that Elizabeth had many future plans and would never do anything to harm her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive and a piece of concrete was tied around her neck and she was thrown off the bridge. This is supported by the results of the forensic examination, which showed that she had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her screams of despair as she was thrown off the bridge. However, many questions remain unanswered about this murder. Who were the perpetrators, and what was their motive for being so cruel to a mother of many children? Robbery can be ruled out because none of Elizabeth's property was taken. Some theories suggest that the killer may have spotted Elizabeth at the club and secretly followed her home, or that someone was waiting at her home for her return. Her ex-husband, Rudolph, still insisted that he was asleep at his house on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime, however. Investigators were reluctant to rule Rudolph out as a suspect because he had no alibi and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the Elizabeth's funeral, he pretended to be sad. He cried by his ex-wife's coffin and said that he wished he had died instead of her or with her. His sister Elizabeth believed that his words were sincere. Rudolph also actively helped set up a charity fund to organize a farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was summoned to take a statement again, his attitude and behavior completely changed, as if nothing serious had happened in his life. After a thorough examination of CCTV footage along Elizabeth's final route, a car identical to Rudolph's was seen leaving her parents' home at around 3 a.m. A neighbor also confirmed seeing the car parked near the victim's home. Notably, the car was later spotted moving towards the bridge where she was thrown. This raised many questions. When the investigation found Rudolph's cell phone data from the night of the incident, more questions were raised. That night, he made several phone calls from different locations, near Elizabeth's workplace, then near her parents' home. He also sent several text messages to Elizabeth, trying to determine when she would be home, but received no response. Apparently, he was following Elizabeth and decided to wait for her at her parents' home. Eventually, with enough evidence gathered, the police arrested Rudolph as the prime suspect and took him to the station for further questioning. A key witness in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When shown the rope that had been removed from around his mother's neck, he recognized that he had seen and played with it in his father's backyard. He also remembered that there was a piece of concrete in the yard before the fence was replaced. Similar pieces of concrete were found in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for Elizabeth at her parents' house and kidnapped her before she entered the house. He forced her into the car, which had rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to the bridge to commit the murder. Rudolph Ariano was arrested 10 days after his ex-wife's body was found in the lake. Despite overwhelming evidence and witness testimony against him, Rudolph denied any involvement and insisted that he was home the night of the crime. For this brutal crime, Rudolph faced the death penalty. Then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess and cooperate with the investigation to reduce his sentence. It was not until January 2019 that Rudolph officially pleaded guilty in court and detailed the kidnapping and murder of his ex-wife and was the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was present in court to hear the testimony, fainted. Alessandra and Giovanna, the victim's sisters, called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph admitted to the murder but showed no remorse or guilt. He spoke coldly about his actions, without apologizing or explaining his reasons. The court sentenced Rudolph to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family said the sentence was too light, but they decided to forgive Rudolph so as not to live in hatred. Currently, Elizabeth's parents and sister are taking care of and raising her children. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Elizabeth Nicole Forshee-Cyperda. Elizabeth was born on May 13, 1978, in Truckee, California. She lived with her parents and younger brother. When Elizabeth was 13, the Cyperda family moved across the street. Michael and Sally Cyperda had 2 young children and were struggling to balance work and family. Michael wanted Sally to go back to work, so they decided to find a babysitter. Michael suggested hiring Elizabeth, then 14, to babysit their children. Sally agreed, and Elizabeth began babysitting for the neighbor's family. Elizabeth grew attached to Michael and Sally's children as she spent more time with them. The children also enjoyed being around her. When Elizabeth was 15, her father passed away, a traumatic event that deeply affected her. According to her mother, Donna Forshee, Elizabeth became more sensitive and vulnerable after this event. She began to admire and grow closer to Michael Cyperda, seeing him as an ideal father figure. Elizabeth believes that Michael loves his children unconditionally and supports their interests. Elizabeth used to babysit Michael and Sally's children during the day. However, she started staying at their house until late at night. This continued for about 2 years. One day, Michael decided to move to Iowa with his family to be closer to his relatives. He invited Elizabeth to come along as a babysitter. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, strongly objected and tried to stop her daughter, even calling Child Protective Services to intervene. However, Donna's efforts were in vain. Elizabeth was too attached to Michael, Sally, and their 2 children. Although she was still in high school, she was determined to stick with her decision and moved to Winfield, Iowa with Cyperta's family. After Elizabeth moved away, her mother Donna and her best friend Shannon Gerber maintained regular contact with her, either by phone or by weekly letters. Elizabeth graduated from high school in Iowa in May 1997. Donna attended her graduation and gave her daughter an emerald and diamond ring, which Elizabeth treasured. During this time, Michael divorced his wife, Sally, and began a relationship with Elizabeth. After the divorce, Sally left the children with Michael and Elizabeth and moved away. Although Sally maintained contact with her children, she cut off all contact with Michael and stopped speaking to Elizabeth. Michael, then in her 40s, immediately demonstrated his controlling nature. He limited what Elizabeth could and could not do, as well as who she could talk to. He attempted to control every aspect of Elizabeth's life. From the beginning, their relationship seemed dysfunctional. As a result, Elizabeth's mother and best friend Shannon found it increasingly difficult to contact her. Michael did not like Elizabeth talking to them and would often get angry if she did. As a result, Elizabeth would only dare to call them when Michael was not home. During this time, Elizabeth became friends with Harper Tracy through church. Harper noticed that Elizabeth had suffered 5 or 6 injuries during their friendship, including finger marks on her neck and bruises on her stomach. Harper's daughter, Sadie, who was about 7 years old, knew Michael's children through church and occasionally played at their home. Sadie remembers one time when she visited, she witnessed Michael pushing Elizabeth down the stairs and kneeling on her. Harper also remembers Elizabeth arriving at church in a state of panic and fear after fleeing a violent argument with Michael. Elizabeth confided that she was afraid of Michael and could not take any more abuse. Harper discovered multiple bruises on Elizabeth's stomach and marks on her arms. Elizabeth stayed in Harper's trailer for a month. During that time, Michael appeared near the trailer almost every day and acted threateningly. He would park his truck about 10 feet away from the trailer and tease Elizabeth. Specifically, he threatened her by saying that Elizabeth would be isolated and no one would find her if she did not listen to him. He left hazmat notices and a torn cat collar outside, along with a message warning that she would disappear like the cat if she did not return. He also threatened to harm the family's animals and began blackmailing her with videotapes and photos he had. According to Harper, he threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body 6 times. Harper called the police to stop him, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. There were clearly many warning signs about Michael. Everyone saw him as someone to stay away from. However, Elizabeth was young and naive, so she still hoped that Michael would change. Unfortunately, at the age of 40, people rarely change their behavior and attitude towards others. After a long time of pressure from Michael, eventually, Elizabeth decided to leave Harper's trail to live with Michael. They married in January 1998 in Mount Pleasant. Despite her attempts to prevent the marriage, Harper attended their wedding. Afterwards, Michael took the initiative to cut off all contact between Harper and Elizabeth. At Michael's request, Elizabeth finally told Harper not to come to their house anymore. Harper was not the only one concerned about Elizabeth and Michael's marriage. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, also disapproved of the relationship and refused to come to Iowa for her daughter's wedding. However, in June 2000, Elizabeth went to California to attend her younger brother's high school graduation. Although Michael stayed in Iowa, he continued to keep an eye on Elizabeth. During the 3 days Elizabeth stayed with her mother, Michael called her repeatedly. He was concerned that Donna was trying to influence Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. After each call, Elizabeth felt sad and confused. She considered leaving her husband but was not sure. To reassure Michael, Elizabeth moved out of her mother's house and moved in with Shannon Gerber, her childhood friend. Shannon had kept in touch with Elizabeth since Elizabeth moved to Iowa. They tried to talk every month, often calling when Michael was not home. However, Elizabeth's move to live with her friend did not lessen Michael's anger. Instead, he began harassing Shannon by calling her repeatedly. Most of the calls were threatening. Shannon recalled Michael threatening Elizabeth. He screamed at her and said he would kill her if she did not come home. Michael also threatened to kill Elizabeth's mother, younger brother, Shannon, and her young son. He called her constantly, day and night, sometimes dozens of times an hour. Finally, Shannon's husband couldn't take it anymore and turned off the phone. This clearly made Michael even angrier. Shannon begged Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. "I didn't want her to go because I was afraid I would never see her again," Shannon confided. She deliberately took a detour to the airport, hoping Elizabeth would miss her flight. However, the flight was delayed and Elizabeth was still able to catch it. After returning to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Elizabeth began working at Experian. There, she met Sarah Thomas, a coworker who quickly became her best friend. Because Sarah lived near the Sipura family home, she often took Elizabeth home after work. During these trips, they talked a lot and Elizabeth gradually trusted Sarah. She shared with Sarah about her difficult relationship with her husband, Michael, and even showed Sarah the bruises on her body that Michael had caused. Elizabeth and Sarah became very close to each other, close enough to cause problems. One day, while Michael was away, his two children peered through the bedroom keyhole and saw Sarah and Elizabeth getting intimate. When Elizabeth discovered that the children had witnessed the scene, she hastily packed up and moved in with Sarah. When Sarah's girlfriend, Terry, went outside to walk the dog, Michael came over and asked her to call Sarah's work phone and ask Elizabeth to return home. He had a bottle of alcohol in his hand, and his children were following him and crying. Michael explained that his wife had left him, she was not answering his calls, and he did not know what to do. When Elizabeth and Sarah entered the apartment, they saw Michael and Terry waiting for them. Frightened, Elizabeth and Sarah left. Michael shouted at Terry to follow him. They got into the car and gave chase. The two couples met face to face in a nearby parking lot. Terry started fighting with Sarah because she felt betrayed. Elizabeth was sitting in the car at the time and was afraid to get out. Cursing, screaming, and threatening, Michael approached Elizabeth and dragged her out through the window of the car. During the struggle, Elizabeth suffered a lacerated rib, and her shirt got torn. Sarah and Elizabeth fled to a nearby gas station, where they reported the assault to the police. The state charged Michael with first-degree burglary and domestic abuse assault. The court approved the no-contact order protecting Elizabeth. Terry packed her things and left, so Elizabeth and Sarah started living together. Michael continued to harass Sarah despite a ban. He would sit across the street, shouting insults or verbally abusing her. Additionally, Sarah received numerous incoming phone calls, but whenever she picked up, the caller would remain silent. She filed a report with the police, who worked with her phone company to set up a trap on her line to track the origin of these calls. Over a 3-week period, from June 26 to July 16, Sarah's phone records revealed Michael made 162 calls to her apartment. On July 16, 2000, 1 month after her breakup with Michael, Sarah left for work at 10:30 p.m. At the time, Elizabeth was asleep on the couch. Their dog was safely locked in the bathroom to avoid disturbing Elizabeth when Sarah returned home at 4 a.m. However, upon arriving back, Sarah was surprised to find that Elizabeth had vanished. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle, and Elizabeth's personal documents remained intact. The dog was still locked in the bathroom. Sarah decided to go to bed. When she awoke the next morning, Elizabeth was still missing. It became clear that Elizabeth had left without taking her purse, clothes, or other essential belongings, and she did not leave behind any note or explanation. Sarah reported Elizabeth's disappearance to the police 24 hours after first discovering she was gone. Elizabeth was 22 years old when she disappeared. The police launched an investigation, and of course, Michael was their first suspect. On July 16th, the day Elizabeth disappeared, Michael started phoning the apartment around 3 p.m., logging more than a dozen calls through the evening. He last called at 10:56 p.m., that is, he stopped making calls 26 minutes after Sarah left for work and left Elizabeth alone. On July 17th, Michael was supposed to be at work. His friend Jared agreed to watch Michael's children. Jared testified he found Michael was pretty intoxicated when he arrived at his house around 5:30 a.m. Jared said Michael told him Elizabeth had stayed overnight and left around 5 a.m. Michael decided not to go to work that morning. Police called Michael the next day, July 18th, to ask if he had heard from Elizabeth. He said he had not. On July 20th, officers came to his house to let him know Elizabeth was missing. Michael said his taking a sick day from work on July 17th, the day after Elizabeth disappeared, was a coincidence. Michael also stated that due to their breakup, he hadn't been eating and had been getting cramps. Elizabeth seemed to disappear into thin air. She didn't contact her family or friends, her bank account was untouched, and she had not even received her salary for the last month. The investigators knew that Elizabeth could not just leave without documents and money. All the friends she could have stayed with knew nothing about her whereabouts. The police interviewed residents and distributed flyers with an image and description of Elizabeth, but none of these actions gave the desired result. In early September 2000, Larry Headland, an agent with the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation, interviewed Michael. During the interview, Michael claimed that he and Elizabeth had a harmonious relationship and denied any allegations of abuse between them. When asked about the attack on Elizabeth on June 16th, Michael admitted that it was an unusual action on his part. He explained that he had been drinking and that his emotions had taken over, leading to his inappropriate actions. Initially, Michael denied making the harassing phone calls to Sarah's apartment. However, when presented with evidence from the call records, he admitted responsibility. The agent then pointed out that the calls to Michael's apartment had stopped the night Elizabeth went missing. This caused Michael to become stressed. Michael explained that he just wanted to avoid arrest and did not want to be charged or held responsible for anything. That's why he lied about the phone calls. He objected when Larry suggested that Elizabeth was dead. After this interview, the police obtained a search warrant for Michael's home. In Michael's bedroom, the police found an unlocked safe. Inside or on top of the safe, an officer found a $2,000 gold pendant that Michael had given Elizabeth and a V-shaped diamond and emerald ring that she had received from her mother as a graduation gift. Elizabeth only removed the ring when she was showering or soaking in the tub, otherwise, it was on her finger. In police photos taken after Michael attacked Elizabeth, the ring was still on her hand. Elizabeth had not been back to Michael's house since. So how did the ring end up in Michael's safe? When the police asked for an explanation, Michael said that Elizabeth must have left it behind when she moved out. However, officer pointed out that Elizabeth was still wearing the ring in a photo taken on June 16th, the day of the attack. Michael could not explain why the ring was in his bedroom. There are some suspicious points in Elizabeth's disappearance. Michael abruptly stopped contacting her on the day she disappeared, although the police only notified him 4 days later. This suggests that Michael may be hiding something. However, the police need concrete evidence to charge him. Time has passed so quickly that it is difficult to find clues. One possibility is that Elizabeth voluntarily went into hiding. But her family does not believe this. Although the case has been quiet for many years, her mother, Donna, has not lost hope that her daughter will return. Every year, she travels to Iowa, where Elizabeth used to live, to organize activities to raise awareness about her daughter's disappearance. In 2010, Donna rented a billboard with Elizabeth's picture and offered a $20,000 reward for any information about her daughter. Donna said she was concerned that something might have happened to her daughter, but she was hopeful that she would eventually be found. "Someone definitely knows what happened to my daughter, and I hope that us coming out will jog their memory," she said. 10 years after her daughter's disappearance, Donna has developed her own theories about what happened. In an interview, she said, "I think the person called her and lured her out of the apartment to meet them. Then they argued and something bad happened that night." Despite the best efforts of the police and her family, Elizabeth's fate remains a mystery. Since her disappearance in 2000, investigators have searched 79 different locations but have not found Elizabeth's body. They entered her information into the National Crime Information Center's Missing Persons database. 17 years later, in 2017, the investigation was reopened. By this time, Michael Sieperta had moved to Colorado. Police reviewed all the evidence and interviews. They discovered a key detail that had previously been overlooked. Jared, Michael's friend who was assigned to watch Michael's children on July 17, 2000, told police that when he arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m., he found Michael quite drunk. According to Jared's testimony, Michael said that Elizabeth had stayed the night and left around 5 a.m. However, in previous interviews, Michael had never mentioned Elizabeth sleeping over at his house. More significantly, Elizabeth's jewelry was found in Michael's safe. Authorities decided to arrest Michael 17 years after Elizabeth went missing. Although her body was never found, investigators believe that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was the culprit. In November 2017, Michael was arrested in Colorado and extradited to Iowa, where he was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife Elizabeth. Donna said, "This is the best news we've had in 17 years. We've waited a long time and are so glad that he's finally been arrested." Michael later waived his right to a jury trial. The loss of key physical evidence, especially the victim's body, made it significantly more difficult for prosecutors to prove guilt. Without a body, forensic experts could not determine the cause of death, and the jury could not directly observe the victim's injuries or view crime scene photos. The defense argued that the prosecutor's goal was not to find the truth, but to convict Michael by looking for inconsistencies in witness testimony. Although the trial took place 18 years after the incident, the defense acknowledged during closing arguments that a body was not required to establish a homicide. However, Michael still challenged the state's evidence of Elizabeth's death. The district court concluded that the state had proven her death beyond a reasonable doubt. The court held that any theory that Elizabeth was still alive and could reappear at any time was unrealistic. The state presented evidence that Michael was the last person to speak to Elizabeth at 10:56 p.m. on July 16, which he himself admitted. The district court noted Jared's testimony that Michael told Elizabeth to stay at his house that night. In addition, there were other suspicious circumstances. Michael unexpectedly left work on July 17 and did not call Elizabeth's apartment again, even though the police did not officially report her missing until July 20. From this evidence, the state established that Michael's hatred of Elizabeth led to murder. Because Michael was controlling and possessive of Elizabeth, it was highly likely that he intentionally caused her physical harm when she decided to leave him for someone else. The strained relationship between them was clear evidence of Michael's intentional intent to cause harm. The state presented evidence that Michael had repeatedly threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body so that no one would find it. From these repeated threats, the jury could conclude that Michael had intended to kill Elizabeth. The court reviewed the evidence and made a crucial decision. They discovered that Elizabeth had opened a new bank account just 9 days before her disappearance, but had not withdrawn her last paycheck. They concluded that she was dead. After carefully evaluating all the evidence, the court found that Michael was responsible for Elizabeth's death. On June 25, 2018, Michael Sieperta, 58, was convicted of first-degree murder. On August 23, 2018, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole and ordered him to pay $150,000 in restitution for Elizabeth's death. However, the story does not end there. In September 2020, the Iowa Court of Appeals changed Michael Seiperta's conviction from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. Judge Mary Tabor, in a 30-page ruling, noted that while there was enough evidence to conclude that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was responsible, the prosecutor failed to prove that Michael intended to kill Elizabeth. This led to the reduced charge. The case was particularly difficult because there was no body, weapon, or crime scene. Michael asked to be released or at least given a new trial. Ultimately, the court sentenced Michael Seiperta to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years.